Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give a few of our participants a few more seconds to join us, so just hold on for a little bit longer. Okay, I think we're going to get going now. So hello, everybody, and welcome to our first Philanthropy Speaker Series for 2022, presented by the City Strategic Partnerships Office. But first, as this meeting is virtual and we are not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. We ask that if this is the case, you acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on and the current treaty holders. For those of us in Toronto, I'd like to acknowledge that the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I am Manjeet Jeeta, the Director of Strategic Partnerships, and with me today I have our host for the Philanthropy Series, Deputy City Manager and Co-Patron for the City of Toronto United Way Employee Campaign, Josie Scioli. Please also welcome from my team, Nisha Nagaratham and Marika Poynton, who have done an amazing job organizing these exciting sessions, both last year and the ones that you'll be part of this year. Now for a few housekeeping items. There will be time for Q&As at the end of today's event. If you'd like to submit a question during the session, please enter it into the chat feature at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the internet in a few weeks with subtitles. If you're teleworking today and are not connected to the VPN, we are asking that you please disconnect from the VPN. You won't lose connection to the meeting, but it will help everyone have a better connection and experience today. For those of you who are connected to WebEx through smartphones, if you're in an area with poor cell service and relying solely on data, you may experience intermittent buffering and you might want to call into the meeting instead. Lastly, everyone will be manually muted during today's event, but we still want to see your faces, so keep those cameras on. We started the Philanthropy Series last year as the pandemic hit every part of our city and cities across the globe. We saw the cracks emerge as some of our most vulnerable residents faced increased income, food, and housing insecurity, and the digital divide looked to widen further as children and youth had to pivot to online education, sometimes, many times, without access to needed technology and support. We also saw you and so many others embrace the spirit of philanthropy by giving your time, your funds, and your expertise to help those who needed our support, investing in community agencies by donating to the United Way and providing support through food and clothing drives, and volunteering your time. It has been clear that the spirit of philanthropy is very much reflected in the spirit of the Toronto Public Service. These sessions aim to build a culture and understanding of philanthropy through strategic discussions with leaders in this field. Last year, we spoke to Daniele Zanotti, the President and CEO of the United Way of Greater Toronto, who reminded us that our donations are critical to the stability of the community-based sector and the services it provides. Senator Ratna Omnivar and Francis Lankin stressed the need to take a social justice approach to philanthropy, and Indigenous leaders like Kris Archie, who is with us today, reminded us that a reconciliation approach must be embedded into any discussion of philanthropy. Today's session will focus on women and philanthropy, what it means to take a feminist approach to philanthropy, but a feminist approach that also looks at diversity, equity, and intersectionality, and our relationship with our Indigenous communities. A few facts and numbers first. The 2015 research by TD Wealth Management communicated that by 2026, women will control 48% of wealth in Canada. That's an interesting number, but that may not apply to all women. And when we take an intersectionality approach, that number may differ. Statistically, the financial support charities receive from women continues to rise, and evidence indicates that women continue to represent a growing and influential force yet to be harnessed by the charitable sector. The Association of Fundraising Professionals has said that women tend to focus on social justice issues and breaking down barriers like discrimination, violence, and poverty. These are all good facts for us to consider as we look at philanthropic efforts to support communities. We have an incredible panel of speakers today to share with us their experiences in philanthropy and the role of gender equity in the philanthropy space. Our first panelist is Nicole McVan, Vice President of Philanthropy and Marketing, United Way Greater Toronto. Nicole is a strategic, nonprofit leader with 20 years of experience in Canada and abroad. Nicole's experience spans many areas, including corporate philanthropy, individual and community-based giving, board and volunteer development, national event management, and alumni giving. As a white, able-bodied, transgender, and non-binary person, Nicole uses an anti-oppressive lens in building philanthropy and marketing plans to work with and for communities. Welcome, Nicole. Our second panelist is Paulette Senior, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Women's Foundation. Paulette has devoted her career to empowering women and girls to overcome barriers and reach their full potential. She started her career on the front lines of social service organizations in some of Toronto's most underserved neighborhoods. She saw how social resources and systemic change could transform women's lives. Through her work and advocacy with shelters, as well as employment and housing programs, she has earned numerous awards and become one of the most respected women leaders in Canada. In 2021, she received an honorary doctorate of law from the University of Lethbridge. She's featured in the book, Inspiring Canadians, 40 Brilliant Canadians and Their Visions for the Nation by Douglas and McIntyre. That's scheduled for release in March 2022, so it may already be out. Paulette can certainly let us know about that. Paulette joined the foundation in 2016 after 10 years as CEO of YWCA Canada. Her work with the foundation is guided by the vision of an inclusive national movement towards gender equity that will strengthen all Canadians. Welcome, Paulette. Our next panelist, and we welcome back Kris Archie, the Chief Executive Officer of the Circle on Philanthropy and Aboriginal Peoples in Canada. In all her roles, Kris works to transform philanthropy and contribute to positive change by creating spaces of learning, relationship building, and centering Indigenous wisdom. She is a Places Fellow alum of 2015 with the Funders Network, a board member with Environment Funders Canada and Jump Canada, and a newly appointed Dialogue Fellow with Simon Fraser University, focused on Indigenous ways of knowing and philanthropy. Welcome back, Kris. Kris, can I also invite you now to maybe share a little bit more about your story with us today?
Wait. Hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. I wanted to just share a little bit more about who I am. So I'm Secwepemc Gamlook from Seskin. My home community is in the central interior of what's known as British Columbia, but our nation's name is Secwepemc, and my home community is Seskin, which means broken rock, and it's a geographic signifier to the place where Indian Reserve Number 5 is. I think that the federal government did a not so great job of naming our territories, so I stick to our community's name for ourselves, which is Seskin. I'm also fourth generation settler Canadian. My father and his family benefited from the gift of stolen land to help settle southern Saskatchewan, like many other folks who call Canada home and call themselves Canadian today. And I'm really pleased to be with all of you. I have the pleasure and the honor of getting things started. I know Josie's going to ask us the juicy question. I'm excited to begin with it. This question about what is one of my first memories of philanthropy. And there are lots of stories that I can think about. I can think about being the kid with the UNICEF box at Halloween, and I can think about knocking on doors as a 12-year-old fundraiser for the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, which of course they don't let kids do that anymore, which is wise. But what I will say is that when I thought about this question, what came to mind was sitting with my grandmothers when I was a young child and first learning how to clean salmon. And I remember being so confused about how every single cut that they made and every single thing that they took away from the fish was being carefully put aside into different buckets, all the way down to like the most visceral part of the fish going into a bucket that would return back to the river where the fishing had happened. Many folks might see that as like, oh, an interesting story about being outdoorsy or cleaning fish. But actually, for me, it's a demonstration of multi-generational ethical stewardship of resources. And it is also about the redistribution of wealth. And for our nation, having the gift of salmon, our ability to dry it, to can it, to share it, and to enjoy it in many months to come is a true gift. So when we talk about philanthropy, I'm very blessed to come from a long line of a matriarchal community whose conception of giving and sharing and reciprocity runs deep and is informed by land and relationship. Thank you.
That is so nice, Kris. Thank you for sharing that. Really, really, very, it actually brings memories of my childhood, what you just said. So thank you for sharing that with us. So Kris knew that I was going to ask that question. So she's so smart. So I'm going to, so, it's an important part of the discussion today is, what's that memory? What's that event that has brought you down this path of philanthropy and why you're so passionate for it? So I'm going to go to Nicole. Nicole, want to share your story with us?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And thank you so much for having me here. And Kris, my story is also about time with my grandmother. And I think when we think about philanthropy, we think about the big bucks and the big transformative gifts and the media releases and things. But when I think about why I do this work, I often think about the time I spent with my grandmother as a child. And she was one of these folks in the community that everybody knew, and she was always there for everybody. And I think about that idea of mutual aid and how we as a community take care of each other. And philanthropy, I think I'm a little bit of a philanthropy history nerd. It kind of grew up a little bit through that. I grew up through some other ways. But I think at the core of that, the work that I do, it's about creating that connection with community and looking at how we redistribute resources to those folks. And my time with my grandmother, I think she taught me everything I need to know about how to live in this world and how to be in this world and how to ask folks for support and how to give support. So I love this question and you're going to make me tear up, so I'm going to stop.
You almost made me tear up because I was thinking about my grandmother and my mother's mom, and I loved her to no end. She was ahead of her time, and I could relate. I could relate to both your stories. So thank you for sharing that. Now we're going over to Paulette.
So I may have to just continue the grandmother story here. Because, and Josie, when you said you're going to ask this question of us, I didn't have this answer in mind, but Kris's comments just like rushed to me a memory of my grandmother. And that memory is very interesting. So, I'm a few decades old, and that's over half a century, I'll just say that. And I grew up with my grandmother in rural Jamaica before I came to Canada as a kid. And so in every such, it's kind of more like a village than a town, right? We didn't have paved roads or anything like that, but we were rich in land, rich in like ground provisions, rich in coffee and ginger and all those things that were farmed. And so I come from a long line of people who farmed land and didn't really appreciate it until I came here, what that meant, because there's a certain level of freedom that comes with that, but also abundance, right? So we were living in abundance, but didn't know it. So we had a church in the community, and I think it's every fall, they used to have this tradition called harvest. And so everyone in the village would bring whatever they harvested from the farm and place it on the where you would kneel. But I guess I haven't gone to church for a while, but it would place it where we would all kneel for everyone to see. So there would be yams and bananas and plantains and all these ground provisions that were grown, and it would just be placed there. And maybe I was 5 years old, right? And it would just be placed there. And of course there would be other things, but it was harvest and it was an annual tradition. And I never thought of what happened, but later on I learned that this was actually given out to people in the community who didn't have all of that, right? So that is in fact my earliest memory And I didn't know until Kris started talking. So thank you, Kris.
I think we have a lot to relate to because that's what my grandparents did. They did harvesting back in Portugal. That's what they did. That's what their land was for. So I mean, you guys brought me down a really great road, a really great memory too. So thank you for sharing your stories. They really actually hit home for a lot of us. I am sure many that are on the actual video conference today are listening to. So thank you. Now I'll go into a few other questions. And okay, these but they're not any new ones. I'm not going to put another one on you guys, I promise, right? Unless I feel like it later, but I won't do it right now. So I'm going to just ask, and I'll actually start with you, Paulette. Why are women in philanthropy important? Why is that so important right now? And especially with what you guys do in your career. So give us your thoughts around that, Paulette.
Well, didn't it start with women? Like when I think of community development efforts, when I think of how we keep each other safe and connected and engaged, and how we build community, we don't think of it in the pretty word of philanthropy. We think about how we actually build community, how we make sure our neighbors are safe, how we make sure that the children can go to school, how we find ways to save money together. In Jamaica, they call that partner. In Trinidad, they call it susu. In different African countries, they have different names for it. A way of saving money so you could actually pay for school uniforms or pay for school fees. Like, so to me, this is something that women have always done, and now we've gotten to a stage of where it's become professionalized, and there's nothing wrong with that, because I agree in paying for labor, because it has been unpaid labor, right? And so now philanthropy is a field that's been formalized and still being led by women, although when I think of who holds the wealth in terms of dollars, it hasn't been primarily women, although over time we know what happens and women get to take on the control of that wealth, hopefully sooner than later. But to me, it's women who have always been making sure that we are comforted and safe and healthy and strong and fed and housed, right? So all of that's always been by women. For me today, and why I'm in philanthropy, I never thought of philanthropy for myself as a career path, but indeed, I have never not sat on a board. In my entire career, that spans decades, I've never not been on a board. I've always been on a board. And it's in my DNA to give and give back in ways that I can. And over the years, it's been through volunteering, it's been through starting new initiatives, it's been by supporting parents who attended the same school as my son to advocate for their kids. Like, so it's always been that. And then when I was making dollars, then that was added to it. So for me, that is been just a way of life that now I get paid to do.
Thank you very much, Paulette. I like the way you put that, actually. We have been doing it for a long time. We built it, and I agree with that. Kris, do you want to augment it? Do you want to answer any of that question too, Kris?
Just resonating with what Paulette was sharing about it's in our DNA to give and to give back, and that, like, gosh, I can't remember the last time I wasn't on a board. I look forward to the days when maybe I'm not on as many as I'm on. But I think this question about why are women important, and also why are non-binary and trans folks important to this conversation. I don't know folks who are more positioned to understand the oppression of patriarchy, who are more positioned to understand knowledge sharing and the labor that is required to do knowledge sharing well. I don't know folks who are more positioned to understand and support survival and abundance in deep relationship with others. And so for me, I think that this, what I would call a resurgence of women in leadership in philanthropy is something I'm glad to see. I want to see much more of. But additionally, I think we need to support other non-binary, trans, other equity-seeking communities who are in leadership in philanthropy to actually make it more aligned to an understanding of community needs. That's what I would add to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kris. And Nicole, do you want to augment that also? Because I have another question I want to pose, which gets to what I think Kris was just was getting at too, is how do you apply the intersectionality approach also to this, right? That's really important. So if we want to talk about that, that would be great too. Thank you, Nicole. And thank you, Kris, and over to Nicole.
Yeah, for sure. I think to that point is those, those typically that are most harmed are in the best place to solve. And that's a really big principle in community development, in philanthropy, and nonprofit social services. And so if we think about it, putting power where it belongs in terms of solving these huge complex issues is really essential. And so when you look at an intersectional approach to philanthropy and to this work, it's about actually making some space for those voices, and not just in a consultative, hey, let's go out and ask for some free consultation by an oppressed group. Let's actually create some space for power, for some power. And that's really, really important. And there, there's different ladders of engagements, and we can learn a lot from the social work field and from other worldviews in terms of how we do this in a way that balances it out. And back to Paulette's point about abundance, I often have this conversation a lot with folks. It's like, oh, so do I not have a place in this as a white person or as a cisgendered man? Do I no longer have a place in this space? It's no, there is an abundance here, but how much room are you taking up? And how do you use your power and your structural advantage, otherwise known as privilege, to amplify and make space? And that's a really critical part about intersectionality, is let's not just hone in on one identity, but let's make sure that we're thinking about the full spectrum of folks that are oppressed and creating that space. It's really, really essential. And to me, it's also the most exciting thing. The most exciting thing is to have a diversity of voices and diversity of decisions, and to challenge each other, and not to create this monolith that sometimes I think we can kind of get into. We kind of silo ourselves.
That's wonderful. That's great, great feedback. So thank you very much. One of the things that, as you know, there's a lot of there's city employees on this call today learning from you and getting your stories. And one of the things that we do ask is, how should the city be thinking about philanthropy as it moves? I mean, it's done phenomenal work, and we're very proud of it, and we continue to just do better. And it's been challenging. The last 2 years has been not easy for a lot of us, as you guys know, because you lived it the same way. But the city has been asked to step up, and they should, as the public expects that. So what's your view about, thinking about how the city could engage differently? What would be your feedback and thoughts around that? So why don't I we'll go to Kris first, and then we'll go to Nicole, and then Paulette. We're doing musical chairs here, okay? So Kris, over to you first.
Thanks. I mean, I think one of the first things is to pay attention to the wisdom of communities and take a look at the fantastic research that exists in Toronto currently about what's being funded and what's not. Take a look at Unfunded, the report created and put out by the Foundation for Black Communities. Understand the various ways in which the city and other communities create secondary research that says these are the issues. Quit going and asking more questions, and then just start funding the things that people already say need to be funded. Additionally, I think it would be really fantastic to see a municipal government really get serious about transforming their own grant making work, their own financial redistribution practices, understand the ways in which you might be complicit in upholding a narrative that Indigenous-led or Black-led or other equity-seeking-led communities are not capable of doing service delivery work. So really challenge those norms. So We're a big fan at the Circle of inviting folks to rethink their practices and policies, and to bring a lens for inclusion and equity to them. So that's one place to begin.
Thank you so much, Kris. Nicole, any feedback?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that, I love that I can listen to you all day, Kris, talk about that, is the idea of strings or no strings. And in each of our beginning stories, we all told a story about our grandmothers in our communities giving away freely. And I think philanthropy has oftentimes, it can get really focused in and narrowed. And so you create strings attached to the gift. And I think about reparations or redistribution or mutual aid. The idea of philanthropy, it's a love of humanity. So give away freely. And to Kris's point, trust those that are most harmed, that they know what to do with that. And the city has been, the work that we do with the city, with United Way, is great. The employees are amazing and the work you do is amazing. And just to keep challenging yourself around this piece of giving away freely and trusting, and that trust piece is so essential, and really critical, I think, as we look forward.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And over to you, Paulette.
I was going to come with the trust, and then Nicole took it. So good on you.
You guys are on the same page. This is really good.
Yeah, I'm loving this conversation. But I think what I will add to that, because what's been said is so already substantive and right on, I will add to that looking at philanthropy, the opportunity to support programs as a partnership with community, right? As an equal partnership. This city has had years of putting money, throwing money at issues. So let's take the issue of gun violence, and let's look at the issue of Black youth. We're still having gun violence. We're still having issues with Black youth. And there's been decades-long attempts to address the issues, and probably not in ways that were engaging, right? But possibly even using a charitable model, which is, let's help these poor youth. And there is an evolvement that's happened. And the evolvement is, unless you center the people whom are most touched and impacted by the issues, everything you do will fail. Everything, right? And so it's really critical that we consider that this is a partnership. This is not communities coming to beg money. This is a partnership where they come to say, we have the answers, we are the experts in our own experiences, and you just basically need to trust us in order to deliver on what needs to be done, because everything else will fail. And if you consider it an equal partnership, then you have a better chance. We all have a better chance of having the impact of actually making a difference.
That's great. Thank you so much, you guys. Did you want to add, Kris? Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just conversational. Whatever you guys want to do, we can make it whatever we want.
Great. So one of the things I would add, given as someone who is a long practice of being a dialogic practitioner and engaging communities and things that impact them, I think at a municipal level, what's often overlooked is that if you're there to work for the people, if you don't represent the people, if you're doing projects that don't accurately reflect those who are involved and are implicated or will be impacted, you are being incredibly inefficient. And so voters don't want to hear about an inefficient government. And so it behooves those of you who are involved in decision making to think about how to be effective and efficient. And one of the ways to do that is to start first with the communities who are involved. Oftentimes what happens, as Paulette was saying, you kind of, someone somewhere gets an idea and is like, well, let's try that. No real meaningful engagement or a commitment to public has been made that makes enough sense. And so people, municipalities, they will throw money at initiatives, at focus groups, at hearing from folks, but they've already made up their mind a bit about what it is they're going to do or what they want to fund or what their strategy is. And so I think it's really important to think about how, to bring a governance perspective to how to do things better, which means you need to slow down typically at the front end to get quality results at the back end, and you have to involve community.
That's great. Thank you. We're good. Can I go to my next question? I know there's some questions in the audience, but I'm going to just ask one more question. We are, from a city perspective, I obviously am the co-patron, but we also have quite a few volunteers and people that support us. And I know that Nicole would know that because we obviously work with Daniele and all that. But the question I have is, we have a lot of Gen X. We have a lot of, and the engagement of the Gen X. So these are people that may be a little bit younger than me, just so we know, just a little touch. No, they're a lot younger than me, just so, oh, thank you, Paul. I like that. Just maybe a little bit. I'm a leap year baby, so I can be as young as I want. Okay, that's what I say, right? So there you go. But just to say that what would, you know, how do you engage from your, what would you recommend as engagement? We spend a lot of time, we have actual, we also have a group of people that get together that actually work together that are the next gen across the organization. Is there any thinking around how engagement, things that we may not be looking at, you would be doing and what you do to engage, especially with the next generation we're looking at? I'd like to get your feedback around that because it's really part of a program that we have and we want, you know, we have a lot of people that are retiring. We also have, you know, that have been here for a long time and getting that next generation to, and I think what you guys said in the beginning was really important. This is, it's not a monetary discussion, it's a giving, a different approach of doing that. So what would be your views around that? I'd like to get your views around that engagement with the next gen. It could be all our stories that we've had with our grandmothers, right? And those are memorable that we all have, but what would be your view in today's world and how we would, what your thoughts are? I'd like to get your thoughts around that. So I'm just going to pick on one of you guys. How about Nicole? Will you first and then Paulette second, and then we'll go to Kris after. Nicole.
Okay. All right, thanks. So obviously there's like traditional volunteering opportunities, those type of thing. But I think what I would say is there's this quote from Richard Wagamisi that says, "Nothing ever grew from the outside in," from one of the books he wrote. And it's such a powerful quote that I think about a lot. And one of the things that I think we can most do is think about the change within us and start practicing that change to ripple out. And what I mean by that is that before we go out and look for issues to try to solve in our communities or in our city, we have to think about how we're showing up in the world, in our personal life, in our work, and think about how we can do things in a more decolonized, equitable, and inclusive way. And oftentimes, you know, organizations or people are looking for, like, give me a program. I want to go, you know, paint a wall or do Meals on Wheels. And there are things like that. But think about how you show up for those opportunities. Think about the ways in which you make your decisions in your everyday work that can have a dramatic impact on us. And so that's what I would encourage most. And I would say if you have a group of really motivated, inspired folks at the city, regardless of what age they are, is to give them the space to work through some of these things and think about what will resonate for them. That can be a really powerful motivator to get people thinking about how they show up. Because I think it always comes back to us, to our core, and how we ripple out.
That's great. Wonderful. Thank you for that. That does resonate, I'm sure, for many that are listening. And this will be taped too, so people that are not on this call will be able to hear this. So thank you. So who's next? Paulette?
So I'll keep it clean since it's being taped.
But you gotta be fun. It's all good. Fun is good. No problem.
You know, as Nicole spoke, they reminded me of a couple of things that's important. One would be, you started us off with us telling our stories. And I think about the power of storytelling. And I don't mean the kind of storytelling that you go into a room with a group of rich people and tell so they could come to tears and then they'll open their wallets. And of course, they should open their wallets without the stories because the stats are there, the realities there, right? It's more about having people themselves engage with their own stories. Them actually, because as Kris spoke, I remember that story that I've never told, right? And so what are those hidden stories within us about when someone helped us, right? Or about something that happened where we helped someone else and the difference that that made. So I think storytelling is really important. And also think, for me anyways, engaging this work, what gets me up every morning is the possibility of being able to fulfill on my passion that keeps me alive, that makes me get up every morning and breathe and be thankful to be here, right? And to be able to make a difference, as well as smashing the patriarchy, right? Like all of that is important. And just being able to have people understand, as Rosemary Brown, one of our founding mothers and the first Black woman to be elected in the legislature in this country, said, until all of us have made it, none of us have made it, right? And so the way that she saw that, to me, that was intersectionality, right? Spoken decades ago, before we all could kind of say this multisyllabic word and have it roll off our tongue. It's considering that all our lives are tied up with each other. And if you're not safe, I'm not safe. If you're not fed, I'm not fed, right? If you're not clothed and housed, neither am I. And so until all of us have made it, none of us have made it, because we depend on each other. And to me, that's one of the lessons from this pandemic, right? So if someone else is not safe, I'm not safe. And how do we keep each other safe? So that's kind of how I look at it.
Thank you, Paulette. Well said. Kris?
Well, I always wanted to be like my cool older Gen X cousins, and for so many years held on to the notion that I was like the last of the Gen X generation, but I was not. Firmly in the millennial camp, and over the last few years, I'm like willing to embrace it. So I think broadly, if you're thinking about engagement, what comes to my mind is just that they're not just with millennials, but like the generations that are already coming into the workforce now. My own son, for example, who's 22 this year. I think often about the gifts of different generations and just how it is that we create more inclusion and space for the wisdom and the gifts of the generations that come after. I think as it relates to philanthropy or it relates to community engagement, I think that big cities haven't been doing a good job at actually making a home for millennial generations. Myself, as someone who previously lived in Vancouver, eventually had to move to Burnaby, and now lives in New Westminster, there is a pretty serious brain drain of folks of that generation leaving cities. We can't afford to live in cities. Policies, zoning, housing affordability is not made a priority at a municipal level. So you're missing out on a whole bunch of, folks who might be willing to volunteer and be involved in their communities. We're moving to smaller cities. We're moving to different kinds of spaces so that we feel like we can have a real contribution to the places where we live and work. And so I think that in terms of engagement, more can be done to think about the gifts of the millennial generation who say, we don't want to just work 9 to 5 for 30 years at the same job and get a pension and retire at 65. We're being asked to consider work-life balance. We're being asked to reconsider what are true benefits to finding purpose in the workplace. In my own organization, having a 4-day work week through 2 months of the summer, having a 3-day office shutdown, thinking about what it means to care for Indigenous and racialized women through extreme, health and wellness benefits and lifestyle spending accounts. Those are the things that are making the difference and demonstrating support and admiration for the leadership of millennial folks in the space. So organizations can do more to support folks in that generation for sure.
Thank you so much. That is really, really good feedback. And actually, we've talked about that too, because we're seeing that as we know what's going on in the housing market here down Toronto in particular, right? We see that across the board. So thank you for your feedback. I have this big question, but I know we're going to go to the audience soon, and I know Nisha's going to ask us the question. One last bigger question, right? And it's something based on your backgrounds too. Just what's the trend that you're seeing? I know we've talked a bit about Toronto. We've talked about what you do. What's the trend that you're seeing from a philanthropy perspective globally? Just to give us that view. What are you seeing? And there may be some of the stuff we just talked about. I just want to get. Is there anything that's an outlier that we haven't talked about that's important for the group to understand? So now I'll just go pick on. I'm going to pick on Paulette first, and it would be good because, you know, a lot of people are they're either focused on Toronto, they are focused on specific things. What's globally? What are we seeing there? And there's a lot of stuff going on globally that is heart-wrenching at times too. So why don't we turn it over to you, Paulette, and just get your views around that, what you're seeing, what the trends are.
I think we've already been saying it.
I know.
In some respects, but I'll talk about conversations that I'm having with colleagues within these geographical borders and outside of these geographical borders.
Okay.
It's looking at ways that we can actually collaborate to create cultural and systemic change through philanthropy. Right? It's looking for those, because we've all been sort of hunkered down for many years, you know, doing our best to fund programs, to keep within our streams, to change lives, and to make you know, hundreds of people or tens of people better every year. But when I look at stats that tell me that every year I have to go up and say 1 in 6 women are being killed by the current or former intimate partner, every year, 1 in 6 women. Like, so that is not satisfactory in terms of what we've been doing for decades. So it's really looking for the opportunity to collaborate beyond what we do. Right? So if I'm focused on gender equality and gender justice, and you're focused on climate justice, and someone else focused on Indigenous justice, right? And eliminating racism, racial justice, how can we put together, right, our collective knowledge and expertise and sharing, finding those common places to meet and say, let's have this bigger collective impact to transform the world? Because the reason I'm doing this work is that I can leave it better than how I found it. But I'm not quite sure I have done that when every year I get up and say 1 in 6 women. I'm just not sure. So I think that, you know, conversations I had today, last week, that I'll have next week, it's all about how do we kind of form a strong network to create cultural shift and systemic change.
Well said. Thank you, Paulette. You did have more to say. See how important that was, what you said. So thank you. Maybe I'll go over to Kris. Kris, any feedback on that question?
I'm going so many places after hearing Paulette. Thank you for that sharing. I would benefit from hearing the question again.
So the question I had is the trend in philanthropy.
Oh, trends, yeah.
In philanthropy from a global perspective.
Offshoots. Totally. Thank you, Paulette. I was like, oh yeah, that and that and that. These things are so important. I think, you know, maybe I'll go way over to like some of my wildest dreams about philanthropy that are just like not quite trends yet, but with the right folks and the right attention could become trends. I'm seeing more philanthropic organizations consider what it might mean to sunset their organizations and or to radically divest from harmful investment tools and or markets. And I think that there is an increasing level of, especially to be honest, tech created wealth, who are looking to redistribute their wealth, and they're not looking at typical behaviors like endowment building or building a family office or a foundation. They're just trying to figure out how to get the money out of their hands into the hands of other people. So I think hopefully we'll see more of that. There's announcements about Mackenzie Scott's contributions in Canada. Hopefully, you know, maybe one day I'll get lucky and get a phone call like that. But I think there are lots of folks who need to pay attention that's happening, and it's happening quietly, but I think it could radically shift philanthropy. Another is that we're seeing more and more folks, giving actual decision-making power to actual, I think piles of money, but to actual dollars. It's like, it's gone are the days where you engage in Indigenous advisory and ask them to give $20,000 grants. Let's talk about $250,000 grants. Let's talk about $1.5 million grants. Let's actually see more and more folks giving true decision-making power about true amounts of money to those who are equity seeking. Give it over to Black and Indigenous and racialized communities. Give it over to queer folks. Give it over to disability justice rights folks. These are the folks in communities who know best where the pain is and how to support change. And then finally, and this is totally selfish, but I feel like there's a growing community of folks who recognize the value of making a choice to be in this education around folks and white supremacy. We're very fortunate at the Circle. We are surrounded by a circle of folks, both from settler philanthropy and in other and Indigenous organizations. And we kind of don't make a whole lot of space for the basic education. We're like, you know what? There's a whole Google out there. We have an expectation about what you should know before you enter into the space for transformation and accelerating change. And I hope that there are more folks, more organizations, more networks who have that desire to say, you know what, we can spend a bunch of time educating over here related to the harm of white supremacy, or instead of funding those kinds of projects and programs, give that money to organizations that are already led by equity seeking folks who are already just doing good work, who don't need the education about anti-Black racism and about intersectionality because it's in their DNA already. I would say that would be really great. And additionally, I think more groups are doing away with this notion of quality over quantity. We are deeply focused on bringing our members and our work to depth. I don't care about a large number of folks. I care about a group of folks who are dedicated, who are strategic, who are in relationships of learning with one another. I think that's how transformation happens. It's not always about the biggest amount of folks who sign a petition and then walk away and don't ever think about that petition they signed anymore. We need to be willing to galvanize folks by going deep with them and going long, not this like, wide and shallow.
It's great. Thank you so much, Kris. Nicole.
Oh,
And I thought this
following
question
those
was
two,
going
I
to be
love
short and
this.
sweet. Look at it.
Are you kidding me? And I feel like we could do a full day discussion on the trends
You
of
guys got
philanthropy,
till,
or
I can be here till tomorrow morning if you want. Okay, there you go.
yeah.
Over to you, Nicole.
Or as Kris said, the wildest dreams, which I love that framing too. I would say the only thing I would add to this is this idea of impact over intention. And it's kind of echoing a lot of what Paulette and Kris said. The idea that philanthropy is built on stolen land and stolen labor. Just like everything else in our society, we have to challenge and question the foundations of it. It doesn't mean we toss it out. It doesn't mean we don't love it. I love what I do and I'm really committed to it. But if I don't question it, it doesn't mean the harm isn't there. And so what I'm seeing trends in philanthropy is donors, nonprofits, volunteers speaking up and saying, I want to question this. I want to question what I'm doing here. And even though I have great intention, am I causing harm? And I think if you hold that principle of impact over intention, that then creates, to me, the future of what philanthropy can look like, which is actually really the past because everything's circular. But that's a really important thing that I'm seeing, and it's caught on in some areas more than other. And I would just love to see us question. Just let's not take this as there's no harm created. Let's question what we're doing and really investigate that.
It's great. So thank you. We have the audience who has a question, and I'm going to ask Nisha or America to actually ask the question to you guys. And then whoever wants to start first, just put your hand up, or your technical hand or your physical hand. It doesn't really matter. So we'll just go over to Nisha if you want to ask the question.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, Maricar,
So
sorry,
I'll
Maricar,
do
go ahead.
it. So we have Christine Spielman asking, how do you determine when you can move from engagement to action? And how do you respond to criticism that action comes too slowly? Kris actually started replying, so if you'd like to elaborate on that.
Kris, you want to go first?
I was replying in the chat to a different question, actually.
Oh,
That
a different question. So Kris was replying to a different question. Do you want to answer this one right now? Do you want to start? Not right now?
no, I'm good.
Okay. Nicole, you want to take a crack at that, or Paulette? One of you guys? Just toss a coin. Go ahead.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
Paulette.
Over to you.
Okay. Yeah.
You're it, Nicole. Okay.
Okay. I think this is a good one, and Kris put actually a link in there around the spectrum of public participation, which people can check out. And Kris wrote, engagement to action, the quality engagement is action. And essentially, you need to do the proper type of engagement before you move. And if you're doing it properly, there should be no criticism that you're not moving. And I think that the criticism comes when there's tokenism or a little bit of just, gentle consultation and not listening. I actually think the criticism comes often when we lose momentum. And if I think about the past 2 years globally and locally, how much change and upheaval and how much conversation there is now around racial justice, Indigenous justice, climate justice, social justice. And the challenge right now for each and every one of us is to keep going. The news cycle moves on, it moves fast. But if we don't keep going, then we rightfully deserve the criticism. It's not about slow, it's about momentum here. And this to me is this constant thing is if we don't take action, then we deserve that criticism. And if we take our foot off the gas when the news cycle moves on, then shame on us.
Thank you, Nicole. Well said. Paulette, do you want to add anything?
I loved what Nicole said, and the only thing I can add, because it's not worth going fast and sacrificing the impact that you're working to create. And so for us at the Canadian Women's Foundation, we created intersectional feminist principles that guide our philanthropic work. So maybe I'll just take a moment to share them with you. So it involves a commitment to work towards undoing patriarchal relationships and structures that are in place. It involves raising the power and ambition of all women, girls, trans, and non-binary people. It involves pursuing truth, reconciliation, decolonizing practices in our work. And it involves supporting and building collective action and movements. So it's and that last point I particularly like because we've been used to funding individual programs in communities across the country, and we've moved towards continuing that, but also funding movements and initiatives that are creating change in communities that haven't been tested and tried, but lots of learning opportunities from funding such initiatives as well. So I think the foundation upon which we are building will propel the actions that we need to take and will guide us as we move forward and provide a check-in points along the way to make sure that we're on track in terms of the work that we're doing. So that's what I would add to what Nicole had to say, which was already brilliant.
That's great. I mean, what you both said were brilliant. So thank you. Maricar, do we have any other questions on the chat? No, I think there's a lot of comments, but not questions, right? So I know we only have 5 minutes left. So I wanted to first of all say thank you. This conversation we had was actually really inspiring for me. Personally, I want to thank you. I took notes as you guys were talking. I took notes, so it was kind of trying to keep. And I know we're going to tape this, right? But I wanted to just note some things that we talked about that I think are important for the folks on the line to hear. And what was well said was, engaging our community, collaborating, and creating that cultural and systemic change through philanthropy is what I know Paulette said, and that was very important. And I do think it was really important to hear what Nicole was saying. Nothing ever grew from outside in. How you show up is really critical. And that to me is actually so important in everything we do, actually. And so it's just such a great statement. And I think, and I've heard this from Kris before. She's told us our practices, our policies, and how we actually and what they are really critical in the way in which we partner with our communities and what we do. So I think that's important. And I like what you said. It was Kris. You said, "Go deep, go wide. Go wide. Quality engagement. It matters here." Rather than trying to do everything and then not do anything well at the end of the day, and impact over intention. So thank you for that. And the one thing that I want to thank you all three of you for is the hidden story, or the story that it was a hidden story for Paulette. She just, as you guys, what Kris started, that story came. And then that came to me too as the same thing, right? So I want to thank you for creating such a great memory for me, actually. It's a memory that it's actually so important in my own life. So what you guys do is have actually inspired, I'm sure just not myself. I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you for your support, all of you. And I know you support a lot of the public and what we do. Your work is so important. I just want you to keep on doing the great work that you're doing. And we want to make sure that, some of the things I took note down that we're going to talk as a group, but things that you've talked about that are critical for us to focus on as a city is really important. And things we are doing, things we're not doing as well, right? And we know that there's opportunity here. So thank you to all three of you. Is there any closing remarks you'd like to give the group before we close the actual panel today? Anyone else? Anything else I didn't ask that you really want to talk about, that you want to state around philanthropy, or we're all good? No? Okay. They're quiet. I don't think these are a shy group of people. Doubt it. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Manjeet. Thank you to the Office of Partnership. Manjeet, anything else you wanted to comment on before we go?
No, just to say thank you, and it's wonderful in terms of working in partnership with all your organizations, and I think it's that lens to philanthropy about working together and working in partnership that's critical. So my thanks to you all.
Thank you very much. Everyone that is listening to this, thank you for being here, and everyone have a great evening, and I'm sure we'll be partnering quite a bit more. So thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.